In a sprawling New England estate, a talented illustrator was about to confront generations of family deception. What started as a reluctant appearance at a family reunion took a shocking turn when she came face to face with her own name tag reading, "The inheritance they're all waiting for." Eliza Monroe wasn't your typical heir apparent. For 7 years, she had spent her life building an award-winning career in Seattle, known for capturing truth through seemingly simple images in children's books. When she encountered her grandmother, Beatrice's calculating gaze across the family foyer, she had no idea she was walking into an elaborate test of character orchestrated by the woman who built a publishing empire. Eliza discovered forged letters and financial fraud that would lead to a complete upheaval of family power dynamics. What began as a dreaded 3-day obligation would become a profound reckoning with the true meaning of inheritance. The Monroe family would never be the same after Eliza faced the choice between walking away clean or accepting the burden of rebuilding what was broken. Not just a company, but the fractured bonds between people who had forgotten how to see each other clearly. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Eliza Monroe's grip tightened on the steering wheel as her rental car rounded the final bend in the road. Maple Grove, her grandmother's estate, materialized through the trees like something from a half-forgotten dream. 7 years had passed since she'd last seen those imposing stone pillars flanking the entrance, the wrought iron gates standing sentinel against the outside world. She slowed the car, pulse quickening. The gates were already open, waiting. "Just 3 days," she whispered to herself. "Show your face, check on Grandma Beatrice, then back to Seattle." The invitation had arrived unexpectedly 6 weeks ago, a formal card announcing the Monroe family reunion, handwritten in her grandmother's unmistakable script despite reports of her declining health. Eliza had nearly discarded it, like she had all the Christmas cards and birthday invitations over the years. But something about knowing Beatrice was genuinely ill this time had broken through her carefully constructed defenses. Gravel crunched beneath the tires as Eliza navigated the long driveway that curved through manicured gardens. The New England. Summer had painted everything in lush greens and vibrant blooms that seemed at odds with the knot forming in her stomach. She caught flashes of childhood memories with each familiar landmark: the stone bench where she'd spent hours sketching, the ancient oak where she'd hidden from her cousins during elaborate games of hide-and-seek. 3 other vehicles were already parked in the circular drive. Eliza recognized her mother's sensible sedan, Uncle Richard's ostentatious German luxury car, and what must be Aunt Victoria's practical SUV. She parked her modest rental at a distance, giving herself one final moment of solitude. "Don't let them see you flinch," she murmured, checking her reflection in the rearview mirror. At 28, she looked more like her father than she cared to admit. The same serious eyes, the same stubborn set to her jaw. She smoothed her dark hair, applied a fresh coat of neutral lipstick, and grabbed her weekend bag from the passenger seat. The massive oak door opened before she could knock. A young Asian man in neat professional clothing stood in the entrance, his expression warm but assessing. "Ms. Monroe, I'm Marcus Chen, your grandmother's caretaker. We've been expecting you." His handshake was firm but gentle. Something about his direct gaze made Eliza relax slightly. "How is she?" Eliza asked, stepping into the grand foyer that smelled of lemon polish and history. "Physically frailer than she'd ever admit, mentally sharp as a tack," Marcus replied with a hint of admiration. "She's been asking about you all morning." Before Eliza could respond, voices drifted from the parlor. Her shoulders tensed as a cluster of relatives appeared. "Eliza!" Uncle Richard's voice boomed across the marble floor. "The prodigal niece returns at last." He approached with arms outstretched, his handsome face arranged in an expression of delight that didn't quite reach his eyes. At 59, Richard Monroe still carried himself with the confident swagger of the college quarterback he'd once been, though his waistline had expanded with his ego over the years. "Uncle Richard?" Eliza nodded, accepting his too-tight embrace, with stiff politeness. "We weren't certain you'd actually show," he said, his tone making it clear he'd hoped she wouldn't. "Richard, please," came a softer voice. Aunt Victoria stepped forward, her perpetually worried expression deepening the lines around her eyes. "Eliza, it's good to see you. The drive wasn't too difficult, I hope?" "It was fine," Eliza answered, scanning the room for her mother. As if summoned by the thought, Sarah Monroe appeared in the doorway to the parlor, her hands twisting nervously at her waist. 7 years had aged her 15. Her once vibrant auburn hair was now streaked with gray, and something in her posture spoke of a woman perpetually braced for impact. "Eliza," she whispered, taking half a step forward before stopping, uncertain of her welcome. "Mom," Eliza acknowledged, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. The awkward silence that followed was mercifully interrupted by Marcus. "Ms. Monroe, if you'll follow me to the registration table? Everyone's picking up their room assignments and name tags before settling in." Grateful for the escape, Eliza followed him to a small antique desk where a neat arrangement of envelopes and pre-printed name tags awaited. Marcus handed her a cream-colored envelope. "You're in the blue room. Your grandmother was quite specific about that." Eliza nodded, remembering the room with its view of the gardens where she'd stayed during childhood summers. She reached for her name tag, then froze. Unlike the others lined up on the table with simple names, hers bore additional text. "Eliza Monroe, the inheritance they're all waiting for." She blinked, certain she'd misread, but the words remained, elegant black script on white cardstock. "There must be some mistake," she said, showing Marcus the tag. His expression flickered with something, recognition? Concern? Before settling into professional neutrality. "I'm sorry, Ms. Monroe. The name tags were prepared according to Mrs. Beatrice's specific instructions." From across the room, Eliza sensed rather than saw the ripple of attention. Richard had stopped mid-sentence in his conversation with Victoria. A cousin Eliza barely recognized. James, she realized with a start, now a fully grown man of 32, rather than the gangly teen she remembered, was watching with unconcealed interest. "Is this some kind of joke?" Eliza asked, keeping her voice low. "I assure you, your grandmother rarely jokes about such matters," Marcus replied quietly, though she does have an unexpected sense of humor. Reluctantly, Eliza pinned the name tag to her blouse, instantly feeling marked, exposed. The weight of family eyes followed her as she collected her room key. "Luncheon will be served on the terrace in 30 minutes, Marcus announced to the room. "Mrs. Beatrice will join us if she's feeling up to it." As Eliza turned toward the grand staircase, her mother approached, moving with the hesitant steps of someone approaching a stray cat. "Let me help you with your bag," Sarah offered, reaching for Eliza's weekend case. "I've got it," Eliza responded, more sharply than intended. Sarah's hand dropped. "Your grandmother will be so pleased you came. We all are." The lie hung between them, as obvious as Eliza's damning name tag. "What is this about?" Eliza demanded quietly, gesturing to the tag. Sarah's eyes widened, then darted away. "I'm sure it's just Beatrice being Beatrice. You know how she gets confused sometimes." Another lie. Even in decline, Beatrice Monroe had never been confused a day in her life. "Mom," "Eliza, darling." Richard's voice cut through their conversation as he approached, glass of amber liquid already in hand despite the early hour. "You must tell us all about your little drawing career. Are you still doing those charming animal sketches?" His patronizing tone made her illustrations for award-winning children's books sound like a child's hobby. Eliza forced a smile. "It pays the rent." "Of course it does." Richard nodded with exaggerated understanding. Though I imagine rent in Seattle isn't cheap these days. Victoria was just saying how fortunate we are to have the stability of the family business during these uncertain economic times. The implication was clear. Unlike them, Eliza was struggling financially, a vulture circling the inheritance. As Eliza opened her mouth to respond, a commanding voice called from the top of the stairs. "Is that my Eliza I hear?" Conversation ceased as all eyes turned upward. Beatrice Monroe stood at the landing, one gnarled hand gripping an elegant cane, the other resting on Marcus's steadying arm. At 87, she remained a formidable presence, spine straight. Despite her years, silver hair swept into an immaculate chignon, eyes sharp as they found Eliza's. "Grandmother," Eliza acknowledged, surprised by the surge of emotion that accompanied the word. "Come," Beatrice commanded. "Everyone else can wait. You and I have catching up to do." Without waiting for response, she turned and proceeded down the hallway toward her private sitting room, clearly expecting Eliza to follow. Richard's hand closed briefly around Eliza's wrist. "Don't tire her," he cautioned, concern and warning mingling in his tone. Eliza pulled away, climbing the stairs with a composure she didn't feel. At the top, Marcus gave her an encouraging nod. "Second door on the right. She's been waiting a long time for this conversation." Inside the sitting room, Beatrice had already settled into her favorite wingback chair, looking less formidable than she had moments before. Up close, Eliza could see the papery quality of her skin, the slight tremor in her hands. "So you came," Beatrice stated, studying Eliza with unnerving intensity. The invitation said it was important. And was that enough? Or was it guilt that finally brought you back to Maple Grove? The directness was so typically Beatrice that Eliza almost smiled. Perhaps a bit of both. Beatrice nodded, satisfied. With the honesty. "You've grown into yourself. That's good. Seattle has been kind to you." It wasn't a question, but Eliza answered anyway. "I've built a life there. A good one. Without us." Again, not a question. "Yes." Beatrice's lips curved slightly. "Yet here you are, wearing quite the conversation piece." She gestured to the name tag Eliza had almost forgotten. "Was that necessary? Everyone's already looking at me like I've come to raid the family silver." "Let them look," Beatrice replied dismissively. "Perhaps it's time they examined their own reflections more closely." "What does that mean? What is all this about?" Beatrice leaned forward slightly, suddenly looking every one of her 87 years. "It means I'm setting things right before I run out of time." "The pieces are in motion, Eliza. Watch carefully over the next few days. Not everyone wearing the Monroe name deserves to carry it." Before Eliza could press further, Beatrice straightened, the moment of vulnerability vanishing. "Now, you should unpack before lunch. The blue room is just as you left it. I made sure of that." Recognizing dismissal, Eliza stood. At the door, Beatrice called her name once more. "The name tag stays on, dear. Consider it armor for what's coming." In the hallway, Eliza paused, unsettled by the cryptic warning. From below came the sounds of more arriving relatives, exclamations of greeting, the performative warmth of family reunions. She touched the damning name tag, wondering what game her grandmother was playing and why, after 7 years of silence, she'd been cast in a starring role. At the far end of the corridor, James appeared, his expression unreadable as he registered her presence. He nodded once deliberately before saying, "We should catch up privately, Eliza, tonight after dinner." It wasn't a request. As he disappeared into one of the bedrooms, Eliza felt the first genuine chill of apprehension. Whatever Beatrice had set in motion, it had already begun. The blue room remained exactly as Eliza remembered, from the delicate, forget-me-not pattern on the wallpaper to the window seat overlooking the gardens where she'd spent countless hours sketching as a teenager. She'd unpacked methodically, hanging her modest selection of clothes in the antique wardrobe, placing her sketchbook and pencils on the writing desk. The familiarity was both comforting and unsettling, as though the room had been preserved in amber waiting for her return. The luncheon on the terrace had been mercifully brief. Beatrice had not appeared, citing fatigue, which left the family to engage in superficial conversation, punctuated by lingering glances at Eliza's provocative name tag. She'd weathered their thinly veiled curiosity, deflecting questions about her life in Seattle with practiced vagueness. Now, as evening approached, Eliza stood at the window watching distant cousins play an impromptu game of croquet on the lawn. The formal dinner would begin in an hour. She touched the name tag she'd been tempted to accidentally lose, remembering Beatrice's words. Consider it armor for what's coming. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting her mother, or perhaps Marcus. Instead, James entered, his tall frame filling the doorway. Unlike the gangly, perpetually disheveled teenager she remembered, this James moved with the confident grace of someone comfortable in expensive clothes. His features had sharpened, though his eyes remained the same, calculating, always assessing, advantage. "I thought we were meeting after dinner," Eliza said, immediately on guard. James closed the door behind him. "I figured we should clear the air before we're performing for the entire family." He remained standing, hands in the pockets of his tailored slacks, taking in the room with a slight frown. She kept it exactly the same, right down to those ridiculous watercolors you did. Eliza followed his gaze to the small framed paintings of woodland creatures that hung beside the dresser, her first professional attempt at illustration, preserved as though they were precious. "What do you want, James?" He turned to face her, fully. "I want to understand why you're suddenly grandmother's golden child again when you haven't bothered to call, visit, or even send a Christmas card for 7 years. The accusation stung more than it should have. "I'm hardly the golden child. I just showed up when invited like everyone else." "Like everyone else?" James laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "You're wearing a name tag that might as well say, 'Congratulations, you've won the inheritance lottery.' That's hardly like everyone else. I didn't ask for this." "Maybe not." He moved to the window, looking out at the family gathering below. "But here you are anyway, after 7 years of building your life conveniently far away while I stayed. I attended every birthday, every holiday. I spent weekends learning the publishing business from the ground up. I earned an MBA because grandmother said the company needed modern leadership. I have spent years, Eliza, preparing to carry on the Monroe legacy." The raw hurt beneath his polished exterior surprised her. This wasn't just about money. It was about recognition, about belonging in a way Eliza had actively rejected. "James, I genuinely have no idea what grandmother is planning. This name tag was as much a shock to me as it was to you." He studied her face, searching for deception. "You expect me to believe Beatrice Monroe, who plans her breakfast selections a week in advance, suddenly decided on a whim to make you her heir without telling you first? I don't know what to tell you. Maybe she's punishing you for something. Maybe she's punishing all of us. You know how she operates." James's expression hardened. "I know exactly how she operates. And I know you were always her favorite, even when you were throwing away every advantage she offered you." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Just answer one thing honestly. Did you come back for her, or for what she's worth?" The question burned with unfairness. "I came because she's 87 and ill. Everything else is her game, not mine." He held her gaze for a long moment. "Then I guess we'll see how the game plays out." He opened the door. "Don't be late. For dinner. Uncle Richard has already had 3 scotches." The Monroe dining room could seat 24 comfortably. Tonight, 18 relatives occupied the massive mahogany table beneath the glow of the crystal chandelier. Beatrice sat at the head, ramrod straight despite her frailty, with Richard at her right hand and Victoria at her left. Eliza had been seated halfway down the table, directly across from her mother, whose eyes kept darting between her daughter and her brother. Conversation flowed around her like water around a stone as the first course was served by the catering staff. Eliza focused on her plate, aware of being watched. "So, Eliza," Richard's voice carried easily down the table, "tell us about this illustration work of yours. Is there much demand for— what is it you draw again? Bunnies and such?" Several relatives chuckled. "Actually, Uncle Richard, the Woodland Explorers series has won 3 Caldecott honors," Eliza replied evenly. "But I'm sure you knew that." "Caldecott?" He blinked, momentarily thrown. "Ah, yes. Children's books. Charming hobby." "It's not a hobby when publishers pay 6 figures for the work, Richard," Beatrice interjected dryly. "Perhaps if you'd developed a marketable skill beyond spending my money, you'd appreciate the distinction." A hush fell over the table. Richard's face flushed, but he recovered quickly. "We can't all be creative types, Mother. Someone had to mind the family business while you were indisposed." He turned back to Eliza. "Speaking of finances, how is the market for independent artists these days? I imagine it's rather unstable." Before Eliza could respond, Victoria smoothly intervened. "Eliza, I recently saw a children's book illustrated in a style remarkably similar to yours. The Moonlight Garden, I believe it was called. Was that one of yours?" Eliza recognized the lifeline. "No, but I know the illustrator, Elena Martinez. She's brilliant." Victoria nodded, steering the conversation toward safer waters. "I've always thought there's something magical about children's book illustrations. They stay with you for life, don't they?" As Victoria continued, Eliza caught her aunt watching Richard with an expression that wasn't merely diplomatic. It was calculating, assessing. When Victoria noticed Eliza's observation, she gave a barely perceptible nod before turning her attention to Beatrice. The dinner progressed in similar fashion, pointed questions about Eliza's finances, her future plans, whether Seattle's cost of living was sustainable on an illustrator's income. Each time, either Victoria or occasionally Beatrice would deflect, but the pattern was unmistakable. Richard was building a narrative. Eliza, as the prodigal relative, returned just in time to claim an inheritance she hadn't earned. As dessert was served, Eliza excused herself briefly. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, gathering her composure. "They're not usually this obvious," came Marcus's voice as he approached with a coffee service. "Your return has them." Rattled. "I'm starting to think I should have stayed in Seattle." Marcus gave her a measured look. "That would have made several people very happy, and one very disappointed." He shifted the tray to one hand and slipped her a folded note with the other. "Garden Pavilion, 11 o'clock. Come alone." Before she could ask questions, he entered the dining room. Eliza tucked the note into her pocket and followed. As she resumed her seat, she noticed James watching her with undisguised interest. Throughout the remainder of dinner, she could feel his gaze returning to her, assessing, reevaluating. When the meal finally concluded, Richard suggested brandy in the library. As the family began to disperse, Eliza overheard her mother's voice from the adjoining drawing room. "Can't just stick to the plan now, Richard. She's here, and Mother's made her intentions clear." "The plan remains the same," Richard hissed. "Nothing is settled until the papers are signed. Just keep her distracted and away from Mother's study." "But what if— do you want to lose everything, after all we've done?" "Just do your part, Sarah." Eliza stepped back into the shadows as they emerged. Richard's hand was clamped around Sarah's upper arm, his expression thunderous. Sarah looked pale, conflicted, but nodded reluctantly. "I'll talk to her," she whispered. "See that you do. And for God's sake, get that ridiculous name tag away from her. I don't care if you have to rip it off her blouse." They moved toward the library, unaware of Eliza pressed against the wall in the darkened hallway, her heart pounding. This wasn't just family politics. This was conspiracy. She checked her watch. 9:45. Just over an hour until she was to meet Marcus at the garden pavilion. Until then, she would need to navigate the treacherous waters of family conversation while processing the knowledge that her own mother was somehow complicit in whatever Richard was planning. Eliza touched her name tag once more. Armor, indeed. But against what exactly was she defending herself? And what crucial information did Marcus hold that required such secrecy? As she made her way toward the library, the weight of Beatrice's cryptic words settled more heavily on her shoulders. Not everyone wearing the Monroe name deserves to carry it. The garden pavilion stood at the far edge of the property, a graceful Victorian structure nestled among ancient oaks. As Eliza approached through the moonlit gardens, she could see a single lamp glowing inside. Marcus waited by the wrought iron bench, his posture alert despite the late hour. "Thank you for coming," he said, glancing toward the main house. "We don't have much time." "Why all the secrecy?" Eliza asked. "Because your grandmother asked me to give you this when we could be certain no one was watching." He handed her a small brass key. "It opens the bottom right drawer of her desk in the study." Eliza turned the key over in her palm. "What am I looking for?" "The truth about why you left 7 years ago, and why she's bringing you back now." Marcus's expression was solemn. "Mrs. Beatrice has been collecting information on your family for years. She sees everything, even when they think she doesn't, especially Richard." "What kind of information?" "Financial records, private correspondences, evidence." He paused. "Letters between you and her that never reached their destination." Eliza's pulse quickened. "What do you mean? I never wrote to her after I left." "Are you certain about that?" Marcus checked his watch. "Richard usually takes his sleeping pills at 10:30 and is unconscious by 11:15. The study will be empty now, but you'll need to be careful. Your mother sometimes wanders the halls at night." "Marcus, what exactly do you know about my family?" "Enough to recognize which of them deserves your grandmother's legacy." His eyes met hers with unexpected intensity. "Mrs. Beatrice may seem frail, but don't mistake physical weakness for vulnerability. She's been planning this reunion for months, waiting for precisely the right moment." "Planning what?" "Justice," he said simply. "Now go. You have maybe an hour before someone notices you're missing." The second-floor hallway was silent as Eliza made her way toward Beatrice's study. Distant murmurs from the library below suggested some family members were still awake, but the upper level was deserted. She slipped inside the study and closed the door silently behind her. Moonlight spilled through tall windows, illuminating Beatrice's massive oak desk. Eliza crossed the room quickly, painfully aware of every creaking floorboard. She knelt beside the desk, inserted the brass key into the bottom right drawer, and turned it. The drawer slid open to reveal a single accordion file labeled with her name. Inside, Eliza found dozens of letters organized by date, her own handwriting on envelopes addressed to Beatrice, spanning the 7 years of her absence. Beneath these were another set of envelopes addressed to her Seattle apartment in Beatrice's elegant script. Confusion gave way to cold understanding as she examined the letters. The ones she'd supposedly written, letters she had no memory of sending, had all been opened. The ones from Beatrice to her had never been mailed, their seals intact, with fiction. Trembling hands, Eliza opened one of her letters. The handwriting was a convincing approximation of her own, but the content was foreign to her. Apologies for leaving, explanations about needing space, occasional updates about her life that contained just enough truth to be believable. Whoever had written these knew intimate details about her life in Seattle. She opened one of Beatrice's unmailed letters next. Unlike the forgeries, these were undeniably genuine. "My dearest Eliza, I received your letter with mixed emotions. While I am glad to hear you are finding your way in Seattle, I cannot help but feel there is more you are not saying. The granddaughter I raised would never leave over something as trivial as a disagreement about your career. There is more to this story, and I intend to discover it. Richard assures me you need time and space, but my intuition tells me otherwise. Letter after letter revealed the same pattern. Beatrice suspicious but responding to forged correspondence. Her own heartfelt replies never sent. Someone had systematically intercepted their communication, creating an artificial estrangement that neither had truly wanted. Eliza's eyes burned as she realized what this meant. For 7 years, she'd believed her grandmother had rejected her choices, had sided with the family who insisted her scribblings were beneath the Monroe name. All those years of hurt, of forcing herself not to care, based on a lie. She suspected. For the 3rd year, came a quiet voice from the doorway. Eliza jumped, letters scattering as Victoria stepped into the moonlit study. By the 5th year, she was certain, Victoria continued, closing the door silently behind her. But she needed proof, and she needed to understand why. You knew about this? Eliza demanded, anger flaring. Not at first. Victoria moved to the desk, gathering the fallen letters with practiced efficiency. I discovered it 2 years ago. Richard had Sarah checking the mail, intercepting anything from you or to you. The forged responses were mostly Sarah's work. Richard dictated she copied your style. She has all your childhood journals, you know. The betrayal cut deeper. My own mother? Sarah has always been easily influenced, especially by Richard. Why? Why go to such elaborate lengths to keep us apart? Victoria sighed, suddenly looking every one of her 57 years. Because Beatrice has always seen you clearly. Eliza, even when you were a child, she recognized something in you that Richard could never fabricate in himself or cultivate in James. Integrity. Creative vision. The qualities that built Monroe Publishing in the first place. She moved to the bookcase and pressed a hidden lever, revealing a small wall safe. From it, she extracted a leather portfolio. I've been keeping my own records, she said, opening the portfolio to reveal meticulous financial statements, correspondence, and photographs. Richard has been systematically bleeding the company for years. Bad investments, personal expenses disguised as business costs. He's nearly bankrupted himself 3 times over, and each time he siphoned more from Monroe Publishing to cover his tracks. The documents showed wire transfers, forged signatures, altered board minutes. The night you left, Victoria continued, the argument wasn't really about your career choice, was it? Eliza's mind flashed back to that final confrontation. She'd come home from art school to announce she'd been offered a junior illustrator position in Seattle. Instead of the celebrating she'd expected, she'd walked into a family ambush. Richard, leading the charge, calling her selfish, accusing her of abandoning family responsibilities. Her mother tearfully pleading for her to reconsider. Beatrice, uncharacteristically silent. I overheard Richard threatening grandmother that night, Eliza said slowly, the memory clarifying. He said if she supported my rebellious phase, it would undermine the succession plan they'd agreed to. She said they had never agreed to anything. He told her she was becoming senile. He needed you gone, Victoria confirmed. As long as you were Beatrice's clear favorite, his position was threatened. Sarah helped because Richard convinced her you'd be happier away from the toxic family dynamics. That you needed to find yourself without Beatrice's influence. And grandmother let me go. She didn't fight for me. She thought you were choosing to leave. The first forged letter arrived a week after you left. By the time she began to suspect something, you'd established your life in Seattle. She wanted proof before disrupting it again. Eliza closed her eyes, emotions warring within her. Betrayal, grief for lost years, and beneath it, a simmering rage. Does she know you're showing me this? No, but she planned for you to find the letters. Victoria gathered the papers, returning them to the portfolio. Richard is desperate, Eliza. The company's biannual audit is approaching, and this time he can't hide the discrepancies. If Beatrice changes her will to favor you, he loses everything. What do you want from me? An alliance, Victoria said simply. Richard has controlled this family long enough. Beatrice is testing all of us, but she's placed her hopes in you. The sound of someone in the hallway silenced them both. Victoria quickly closed the portfolio and returned it to the safe. We need to leave separately, she whispered. Take the letters to your room. Confront Sarah if you must, but be careful. Richard has her convinced that what they did was for your own good. As Victoria slipped out, Eliza gathered the evidence of years of deception. Her emotions had crystallized from shocked betrayal into something harder, more focused. 7 years stolen, relationships severed, all because Richard Monroe couldn't bear to be second choice. In her room, she spread the letters across her bed, the physical proof of manipulation that had altered the course of her life. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She quickly gathered the letters and hid them in the wardrobe before opening the door. Sarah stood in the hallway, her expression a mixture of guilt and resolve. We need to talk about the name. Tag, she began. Eliza stepped back. No, Mother. We need to talk about these. She retrieved one of the forged letters, watching the color drain from Sarah's face as recognition dawned. Let's start with how long you've been forging my handwriting. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but Eliza found herself unmoved. The time for gentle reconciliation had passed. Now she wanted answers. Before Sarah could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps approached from down the hall, uneven, stumbling. A moment later, James appeared, leaning against the wall for support, his normally perfect appearance disheveled. The smell of whiskey preceded him. Family meeting? He slurred, his gaze moving from Eliza to Sarah and back again. Perfect timing. I've got some things to say about Uncle Richard and the company, books that you both really need to hear. Get in here, Eliza hissed, pulling James into her room before Sarah could protest. Mother, we'll finish our conversation later. Sarah hesitated, her gaze moving from the letter in Eliza's hand to James's disheveled appearance. Eliza, whatever you think you know? Not now. Eliza cut her off firmly, closing the door. James stumbled to the window seat, dropping onto it with the loose-limbed carelessness of the truly intoxicated. His tie hung askew, his normally immaculate, hair falling across his forehead. Poor Aunt Sarah, he murmured. Always caught between duty and decency. I'd feel sorry for her if she wasn't such a willing accomplice. What did you want to tell me about Richard? Eliza asked, remaining standing. James ran a hand through his hair. Did you know I've been Chief Financial Officer of Monroe Publishing? For 3 years. Youngest CFO in company history. Grandmother made the announcement at the Christmas party you didn't attend. The bitterness in his voice was unmistakable. She said I had the sharp eyes the company needed. James, focus. What about Richard? Sharp eyes, he repeated, his laugh hollow. That's the joke, you see. Because I've spent 3 years watching Uncle Richard systematically dismantle everything Beatrice built, and I've done nothing to stop him. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded sheaf of papers, tossing them onto the bed. Loan applications, 6 of them, all rejected by different banks over the past 8 months. Richard's been trying to secure private financing to cover the holes in the company accounts before the August audit. Eliza picked up the papers, scanning the figures. These amounts are substantial, James finished. 2.7 million, give or take. Money that should be in the operating accounts but isn't. And you've known about this? Known? I've been the one cooking the books to hide it. Self-loathing sharpened his words despite the alcohol. Every quarter, shuffling numbers, creating phantom assets, delaying payments to vendors, all because Richard convinced me it was temporary. Investment opportunities, cash flow issues, market corrections. Why are you telling me this now? James's bloodshot eyes met hers. Because today I found out he's taken a $3 million loan against grandmother's personal assets, without her knowledge. He forged her signature. He shook his head. There's a line, Eliza, even for me. Does Victoria know about this? Victoria knows everything. She just never had enough proof to confront him directly. James leaned back against the window. You really didn't know about the inheritance, did you? No. A humorless smile touched his lips. Well, congratulations. You're about to inherit a company with massive debt and potential fraud investigations. If you're smart, you'll run back to Seattle before the audit. Why would Beatrice put me in this position? Because you're the only one who never asked her for anything. The simple truth hung between them. The rest of us have been living off her success for so long we forgot how to create our own. Eliza studied her cousin's face, seeing past the cynicism to the shame beneath. What are you going to do? Right now? Sleep off this bourbon? Tomorrow? He shrugged. Watch the family drama unfold at grandmother's meeting. She sent out notices this evening. 9 a.m. sharp in the library. Attendance mandatory. Apparently, we're discussing the future of Monroe Publishing. As he stood to leave, Eliza stopped him. James, why the rivalry all these years? We used to be friends. Something vulnerable flickered across his face. Because she always saw something in you that she couldn't find in me, no matter how hard I worked. No matter how perfect I tried to be. He straightened his tie with shaking hands. Turns out she was right. The library hummed with tension the next morning. Family members arranged themselves around the massive conference table that had been set up overnight, their expressions ranging from curious to concerned. Richard sat at one end, reviewing papers with manufactured nonchalance, occasionally murmuring to Sarah, who sat beside him. James occupied a corner chair, nursing what appeared to be both a hangover and a large black coffee. Victoria caught Eliza's eye as she entered, giving her a slight nod. The letters from Beatrice's desk now rested safely in Eliza's room, hidden inside her sketchbook case. Precisely at 9, Marcus escorted Beatrice into the room. Despite her cane and Marcus's supportive arm, she carried herself with unmistakable authority. The quiet conversations ceased immediately. Good morning, Beatrice said, taking her seat at the head of the table. Thank you all for being prompt. Eliza noticed the absence of Beatrice's usual morning frailty. Her grandmother's voice was strong, her gaze sharp as she surveyed the assembled family. As you know, Monroe Publishing has been the cornerstone of this family for over 60 years. What you may not know is that its future currently hangs in the balance. She gestured to Marcus, who distributed folders to each person. These contain the quarterly summary of our financial position. I suggest you review them carefully. Richard shifted in his seat, his normal confidence faltering slightly. Mother, I'm not sure this level of detail is necessary for everyone. Most of the family isn't involved in daily operations. And yet everyone depends on those operations for their livelihood, Beatrice interrupted. I believe transparency is overdue. As Eliza opened her folder, she immediately understood Richard's discomfort. The financial summary showed substantial discrepancies between reported assets and actual holdings. Nothing specific enough to prove fraud, but certainly enough to raise serious questions. Richard cleared his throat, rising to his feet. Perhaps I should provide some context for these figures. He moved to the front of the room, effortlessly sliding into the role of confident executive. The publishing industry has faced unprecedented challenges in recent years. Digital disruption, changing consumer habits, supply chain issues, all requiring aggressive adaptation strategies. What followed was a masterclass in corporate doublespeak. Richard wove a narrative of bold leadership in difficult times, strategic, gambles that hadn't yet paid off but soon would, temporary setbacks on the road to greater prosperity. Throughout, he positioned himself as the dedicated steward who'd carried the burden of difficult decisions while protecting the family legacy. Which brings us to succession planning, he continued smoothly. As Mother's health has become more delicate, we must consider who will guide Monroe Publishing into its next chapter. His gaze settled briefly on Eliza. While we welcome all family members, even those who have chosen different paths, leadership requires commitment, experience, financial acumen, and understanding of business realities rather than creative idealism. The implication was clear. Eliza was an outsider, unqualified, potentially dangerous to the company's future. As Richard spoke, Eliza caught a meaningful glance between Sarah and Victoria. Not the conspiratorial look she expected, but something more complex. Sarah seeking reassurance, Victoria offering a subtle warning. Throughout Richard's presentation, Beatrice remained silent, her expression unreadable. Only occasionally would she make brief notes on the pad before her, her elegant handwriting as precise as ever. When Richard finally concluded, the room filled, with murmured conversations as family members digested his performance. Beatrice let the buzz continue for exactly 30 seconds before tapping her pen against her water glass. Thank you, Richard, for that comprehensive interpretation of our position. Her emphasis on the word made several people shift uncomfortably. I'm sure everyone appreciates your perspective. Now, are there any questions? James raised his hand, his expression deceptively casual despite his bloodshot eyes. I notice the report doesn't include the recent loan taken against your personal assets, grandmother. Was that an oversight? A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Richard's face flushed. What loan would that be, James? Beatrice asked, though her lack of surprise suggested she already knew. The $3 million loan secured last month using your estate as collateral. James's voice was steady, his gaze fixed on Richard. I only discovered it yesterday while reviewing the supplementary accounts. Richard laughed, though the sound held no humor. James is confused. Mother and I discussed contingency financing options, but no action was taken. Actually, Victoria interjected, opening a separate folder, I have the loan documentation here, including the signature page. She slid a paper toward Beatrice. Perhaps you could confirm whether that's your signature, Mother? Beatrice examined the document, her expression hardening. It appears to be, though I have no recollection of signing it. She looked up at Richard, her gaze unflinching. How curious. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard's confident facade cracked momentarily before he recovered. You signed numerous documents last month during your bout with pneumonia, he said smoothly. It was all explained at the time, though you may not remember due to the medications. Indeed. Beatrice closed her folder. This meeting has been most illuminating. We'll reconvene tomorrow after I've had time to reflect on our position. She rose, signaling the end of the discussion. Eliza, would you join me in the conservatory? I'd like your perspective on some matters. As the family dispersed, the tension lingering in their wake, Eliza followed her grandmother through the house to the sun-filled conservatory, where exotic plants flourished in the carefully maintained humidity. Once they were seated among the orchids, Beatrice seemed to relax, the strategic sharpness giving way to something more contemplative. You found the letters, she stated, not a question. Yes. And Victoria showed you her evidence against Richard. She did. Beatrice nodded, gently touching the petal of a nearby bloom. When I was your age, I used to sketch these. Did you know that? Before publishing, before your grandfather, I wanted to be a botanical illustrator. The revelation surprised Eliza. I didn't know. Life takes unexpected turns. We adapt. She glanced at Eliza. Tell me about your work. The real work, not what you share in interviews. For the next hour, They talked about illustration techniques, creative challenges, the joy of seeing children connect with characters born from imagination. Not once did Beatrice mention inheritance, Richard's deception, or the company's future. Instead, she listened with genuine interest as Eliza described her creative process, occasionally asking questions that revealed her own artistic knowledge. As their conversation drew to a close, Beatrice patted Eliza's hand. "My dear friend, Diane arrives tomorrow. She always did know how to make an entrance." A smile touched her lips. "I believe you'll find her perspective on family loyalty quite refreshing." There was something in her grandmother's tone, a hint of mischief, of plans still unfolding, that reminded Eliza of the formidable woman who had built an empire from nothing. "Grandmother," Eliza began carefully, "what exactly do you want from me?" Beatrice's eyes met hers, clear and direct. "I want you to watch. Listen. Learn who people truly are when they believe everything is at stake." She squeezed Eliza's hand. "The rest will become clear soon enough." The arrival of Diane Layton was heralded not by the discreet crunch of tires on gravel that announced most visitors, but by the throaty rumble of a vintage convertible and the blaring horns of jazz from its sound system. Eliza watched from the library window as a sleek 1960s Jaguar E-Type in British racing green swept into the circular drive, coming to a dramatic stop directly in front of the main entrance. "Good Lord," Richard muttered beside her. "Some things never change." The woman who emerged from the car belied her 79 years, tall and striking with a shock of silver hair cut in a stylish bob. Diane Layton wore tailored linen pants, an emerald silk blouse, and oversized sunglasses. She surveyed the estate with the confident posture of someone returning to familiar territory, rather than arriving as a guest. Beatrice appeared on the front steps, Marcus attentive at her side. From a distance, Eliza couldn't hear their exchange, but the warm embrace between the women spoke of a friendship undimmed by time. "I suppose we should all go welcome mothers." "Oldest friend," Richard said, the forced joviality in his voice betrayed by the tension in his jaw. The family assembled in the foyer as Marcus escorted the women inside. Up close, Diane's vitality was even more apparent, sharp eyes taking in every detail, her movements decisive and energetic. "My goodness, the whole Monroe clan," she announced, surveying the gathered family. "How theatrical. Beatrice, darling, you didn't tell me this was a command performance." Beatrice's lips curved in amusement. "Everyone was eager to welcome you, Diane." "I'm sure they were." Diane's gaze settled on Richard. "Richard, still sporting the banker's uniform, I see. How predictable." Before he could respond, she turned to Victoria. "Victoria, you look exhausted, dear. Family peacekeeper is a thankless role. I've always told you to let them sink or swim on their own." Victoria's typically diplomatic expression gave way to a genuine smile. "Some habits are hard to break, Diane." Diane continued her assessment of the family, delivering pointed observations disguised as pleasantries until she reached Eliza. "And this must be the prodigal artist," she said, studying Eliza with undisguised interest. "The resemblance is remarkable, Beatrice. She has your eyes, the ones that see everything and forgive selectively." "Eliza, this is Diane Layton," Beatrice said, "my oldest friend, business partner, and occasional conscience." "Business partner?" James echoed, his brow furrowing. Diane laughed. "Oh my, have they scrubbed me from the official family history? How deliciously predictable." She looped her arm through Eliza's. "I think an impromptu lunch is in order. Beatrice mentioned there's a terrace that catches the midday sun beautifully." Without waiting for a response, she guided Eliza toward the French doors, leaving the others to follow or not as they chose. Marcus, anticipating the request, was already arranging for a cold lunch to be served. The terrace lunch quickly became Diane's stage. She held court at the wrought iron table, regaling them with stories from the early days of Monroe publishing that struck Eliza as fundamentally different from the narrative she'd grown up hearing. The Monroe in Monroe publishing wasn't Harold Monroe at all. It was Beatrice, Diane explained, helping herself to more iced tea. Harold had the business connections and family money for the initial investment, but Beatrice had the editorial, the talent relationships, the vision. Richard cleared his throat. I think you're being rather generous to Mother, Diane. Father was well established in publishing circles before they met. Was he? Diane's eyebrow arched. Harold was a mediocre textbook salesman with a trust fund when Beatrice found him. Charming, handsome, ambitious. But it was Beatrice who discovered Margaret Holloway's manuscript in the slush pile and turned it into the company's first bestseller. Eliza glanced at her grandmother, who was watching the exchange with quiet amusement. The moonlit path, Beatrice murmured. We printed 10,000 copies on faith alone. And sold 100,000 within 6 months, Diane added. All because Beatrice insisted on an aggressive marketing campaign that Harold thought was too expensive. Richard's smile had frozen in place. Mother has always been too modest about her contributions. Of course, Father appreciated having such a supportive partner. Supportive? Diane laughed. Harold spent most of 1963 trying to convince Beatrice to sell the company to Harcourt. If she'd been merely supportive, none of you would be enjoying the fruits of Monroe publishing. Today, throughout lunch, Diane continued reshaping the family narrative, describing Beatrice's editorial innovations, her fight to diversify the catalog beyond commercial fiction, her financial acumen during the industry consolidation of the 1980s. With each story, Richard grew visibly more uncomfortable, repeatedly attempting to redirect the conversation or subtly discredit Diane's account. You have such a vivid imagination, Diane, he said after a particularly pointed anecdote about Harold's resistance to children's books, the division that eventually became the company's most profitable. Though memory does play tricks as we age. My memory is exceptional, Richard, Diane replied smoothly, as are my record-keeping habits. I believe I still have the minutes from that particular board meeting in my personal archives. Harold called children's literature glorified. Picture books and a waste of resources. Beatrice pushed it through anyway. James, who had been unusually quiet, leaned forward. Is that why the children's division is called Beatrice Books internally? I always wondered about that. The very reason, Diane confirmed. Your grandfather was generous enough to admit he was wrong, eventually, after the first $1 million in profit. As lunch concluded, Eliza noticed Sarah watching her with an expression of conflicted longing. When their eyes met, Sarah made a tentative move toward her, only to be intercepted by Richard with a firm hand on her elbow and a whispered comment that made her shoulders slump. The moment wasn't lost on Diane, who murmured to Eliza, Your mother was quite the artist herself, you know. Before Richard convinced her that raising you properly required her full attention. Before Eliza could process this revelation, Diane rose. Beatrice, darling, you look tired. Why don't you rest before dinner? Marcus can show me to my room, and perhaps Eliza would be kind enough to help me with my luggage. It was a transparent ploy for private conversation, but no one objected. Moments later, Eliza found herself following Diane and Marcus to the East Wing guest suite. Once inside with the door closed, Diane's performative energy settled into something more focused. That should give them plenty to digest, she said, satisfaction evident in her tone. Nothing disrupts a carefully constructed mythology like an eyewitness with a different version of events. Were all those stories true? Eliza asked. Every word, Marcus confirmed as he placed Diane's suitcase on the luggage rack. Mrs. Layton's account aligns with Mrs. Beatrice's private journals. You've read grandmother's journals? It's part of my job to organize her personal papers, Marcus replied, with her explicit permission, of course. Diane settled into an armchair, gesturing for Eliza to join her. Beatrice hired Marcus not just as a caretaker but as her archivist. The boy has a master's degree in library science that he modestly never mentions. Marcus smiled slightly. "I'll leave you two to talk. Mrs. Layton, your usual bourbon is in the side cabinet." After he departed, Diane studied Eliza with penetrating intensity. "So you're the inheritance they're all waiting for. How does it feel to be the center of a power struggle you never asked to join?" "Overwhelming," Eliza admitted. "I still don't understand why grandmother chose me after all this time." "Don't you? Despite Richard's best efforts to separate you, you're the only Monroe who inherited Beatrice's most essential quality." She leaned forward. "The ability to see things as they are, not as others wish them to be. Your illustrations show that, the way you capture truth through seemingly simple images." "How do you know my work?" "Beatrice has every book you've illustrated on her bedside table." Diane's expression softened. "She's immensely proud of you, though circumstances prevented her from telling you directly." Eliza processed this, the wound of separation aching anew with the knowledge of what might have been. "What does she want from me now?" "Discernment," Diane replied without hesitation. "The inheritance isn't simply about money or the company, Eliza. It's about legacy. Who can be trusted to preserve what truly matters?" She paused. "But make no mistake, there will be a test before anything is finalized. Beatrice needs to know you're making choices based on understanding, not reaction." "What kind of test?" "That's for you to discover." Diane glanced at her watch. "Richard is likely regrouping as we speak. The stories I shared today threaten the narrative he's constructed over decades, that Harold was the business genius and Beatrice merely the supportive wife who couldn't possibly have built a publishing empire on her own. He's fashioned himself, as Harold's natural successor, the only one who truly understands the business side." "But that's not true." "Of course not. Beatrice has always been the backbone of Monroe Publishing, the creative vision and the business acumen." Diane's expression turned serious. "Before dinner tomorrow night, you should check the old summer house at the edge of the property. There's something there Beatrice wants you to find, something that will help you understand what's truly at stake." A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah stood in the hallway, her expression hesitant. "I thought perhaps Eliza might like to take a walk," she said. "The gardens are lovely this time of year." Before Eliza could respond, Richard appeared, behind Sarah. "There you are," he said, his tone artificially casual. "Mother is asking for you, Sarah. Something about the dinner arrangements." The lie was transparent. Beatrice had retired to rest, but Sarah nodded obediently. "Perhaps another time, Eliza?" As they departed, Diane shook her head. "Your mother wasn't always this way. Richard has systematically undermined her confidence for years." "Why would she let him?" "For the same reason many people surrender. Their agency, fear, of failure, of disappointing others, of facing hard truths." Diane's gaze was sympathetic but direct. "The question for you, Eliza, is whether you're ready to face those truths yourself." From across the room, Eliza caught her reflection in the antique mirror, her grandmother's determined eyes looking back at her. For the first time since arriving at Maple Grove, she felt not just anger at being manipulated, but a stirring sense of purpose. Perhaps the inheritance wasn't a burden to bear, but a legacy to reclaim. "The summer house," she repeated. "Before dinner tomorrow." Diane nodded, satisfied. "Good girl. Now, I believe I've stirred up enough trouble for one afternoon. I think I'll rest before round 2 this evening." As Eliza left the East Wing, she passed James in the hallway. His expression was thoughtful, almost troubled. "Interesting lunch," he commented. "Very. Makes you wonder what else we don't know about our own family history." He hesitated. "I've been reviewing some of the early company financial records. there are inconsistencies with the story we've always been told. It was the closest James had come to admitting Richard's narrative might be fundamentally flawed. Before he could continue, Victoria called his name from the library doorway, her expression significant. "We'll talk later," he said, squeezing Eliza's arm briefly before walking away. The gesture, reminiscent of their childhood solidarity, left, Eliza wondering if the family's careful choreography was beginning to falter. First Victoria's alliance, now James's doubts. Diane Layton had been at Maple Grove less than 3 hours, and already the foundations were shifting. The summer house stood at the farthest edge of the property, half hidden by a copse of ancient oak trees. Unlike the meticulously maintained gardens surrounding the main house, this area had been allowed to grow wild, tall grasses and wildflowers creating a natural barrier that discouraged casual visitors. Eliza followed a barely visible path, memories surfacing with each step. Childhood adventures, teenage hideaways, conversations with Beatrice during the summers she'd spent at Maple Grove. The structure itself was more substantial than its name suggested. A small Victorian pavilion with leaded glass windows and intricate gingerbread trim, built as a retreat for reading and contemplation. The door creaked as Eliza pushed it open, disturbing dust motes that danced in the shafts of afternoon sunlight filtering through the windows. Inside, time seemed suspended. Faded cushions on the window seats, shelves of weathered books, the scent of wood and forgotten summers. Eliza ran her fingers along the spines of leather-bound classics, remembering how Beatrice would read to her here, away from the bustle and expectations of the main house. "Check the old summer house," Diane had said. But what exactly was she looking for? Eliza moved methodically through the small space, examining shelves, looking under cushions, checking the antique writing desk in the corner. Nothing seemed out of place or unusual. She was about to give up when her eyes fell on a watercolor hanging beside the window, one of her own paintings from her 16th summer, a simple study of the view from this very spot. Something about its placement struck her as deliberate. Moving closer, she lifted the frame from its hook, turning it over. The backing had been recently disturbed, the aged paper showing signs of having been removed and replaced. Carefully, she pried it open. Behind her painting was a small brass key taped to a folded note in Beatrice's handwriting. "The past informs the present. Look behind Edward." "Edward?" Eliza murmured, puzzled. Then understanding dawned. Edward was the name Beatrice had given to the massive oak bookcase dominating the summer house's back wall, named after some long-ago relative known for being solid, reliable, and impossible to move. Examining the bookcase more carefully, Eliza noticed subtle marks on the floor. The massive piece had been shifted recently. With determined effort, she pushed against one side, feeling it pivot slightly to reveal a small alcove in the wall. Behind. There, nearly invisible in the shadows, was a recessed wall safe. The brass key fit perfectly. Inside, Eliza found a leather-bound journal and a manila envelope bulging with documents. She carried them to the window seat, where the light was better, and opened the journal first. The familiar, elegant script filled page after page, dating back nearly 3 years. Beatrice's private thoughts, observations, and growing concerns about her family, particularly Richard. November 12th. Richard has requested additional funds for the 3rd time this quarter. Claims it's for market expansion, but James let slip about significant losses in Richard's personal investment portfolio. Beginning to suspect company funds are being diverted. January 30th. Discovered discrepancies in the quarterly reports. Figures have been altered after my review. Victoria noticed as well, but remains silent. Her fear of confrontation serves Richard's purposes too well. March 15th. Richard becoming increasingly controlling of my schedule and visitors. Sarah acts as his unwitting spy, reporting my conversations, who calls, which letters arrive. I've begun keeping this journal here rather than in my study." As Eliza read on, a clearer picture emerged of Beatrice's growing isolation and Richard's methodical consolidation of power, restricting her access to financial information, screening her communications, subtly undermining her authority with the board. But there was something else, too. Beatrice's strategic counter-moves. May 4th. Made a show of confusion during the board meeting today. Richard's relief was palpable. He believes I'm becoming senile, exactly as intended. Being underestimated provides certain advantages. July 20th. Marcus Chen continues to prove invaluable. His background in both nursing and information management makes him the perfect ally. Richard sees only a caretaker where I have found a partner in gathering evidence. September 8th. Victoria finally approached me with her concerns about the company finances. Revealed enough to encourage her continued observation, but not my full awareness. Need her to document independently what she discovers. Then, the entry that made Eliza's breath catch. October 17th. Richard's manipulations have extended beyond the company to personal relationships. Confirmed today that my letters to Eliza have been intercepted for years. The supposed responses I've received were forgeries. The realization brings both pain and clarity. The distance I've felt from my granddaughter was by design, not choice. Now, I must determine how to reconnect without alerting Richard to my awareness. The journal detailed Beatrice's careful planning over the next year, placing trusted allies in key positions within the company, securing copies of financial records, and finally, planning the family reunion that would serve as both test and revelation. February 3rd. The reunion will force all players to reveal themselves. Richard's desperation is growing as the audit approaches. He'll see Eliza's return as a threat to his position. His reaction will provide the final evidence I need before taking action. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. April 18th. Diane has agreed to arrive mid-reunion. Her timing will be crucial. She has always been immune to Richard's manipulation and unafraid to speak uncomfortable truths. Her presence will accelerate the necessary confrontations. The final entries were the most revealing and the most troubling. May 10th. Dr. Chambers confirmed what I've suspected. The symptoms are progressing more rapidly than anticipated, months rather than years. Not enough time to dismantle what Richard has built through conventional means. Must accelerate the plan. The inheritance announcement will force his hand. May 28th. Preparations complete. The name tags will create immediate tension. Eliza will be confused, defensive initially. But she has always had the ability to see beyond surfaces to truth. If she chooses to engage rather than retreat, she will find what Richard has worked so hard to destroy, the heart of Monroe Publishing, and perhaps this family as well. Eliza closed the journal, emotions churning. Beatrice had orchestrated everything. The reunion, the provocative name tag, the strategic revelations. She'd created a deliberate test, not just of Richard's character, but of everyone's, including Eliza's. Turning to the manila envelope, Eliza found detailed financial records spanning the past 5 years. Evidence of systematic embezzlement disguised as business expenses, forged authorizations, shadow accounts. More damning were copies of loan applications using company assets as collateral without board approval. And finally, the document James had mentioned. A large personal loan secured against Beatrice's estate with a forged signature. The scale of Richard's deception was breathtaking. Not just financial manipulation, but a years-long campaign to isolate Beatrice, control the family narrative, and position himself as the only logical steward of the Monroe legacy. Eliza was so absorbed in the documents that she didn't hear approaching footsteps until it was too late. Doing some light reading? She looked up to find Richard standing in the doorway, his casual tone belied by the cold calculation in his eyes. He glanced at the open journal and scattered papers beside her. "Mother always did have a flair for the dramatic," he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "Creative storytelling runs in the family, it seems." "These aren't stories," Eliza replied, keeping her voice steady as she gathered the documents. "These are records. Evidence. Evidence of a confused old woman's paranoid delusions," Richard countered smoothly. "Mother's health has been declining for years. Her perception of reality has shifted. The loan documents with her forged signature aren't delusions." Something dangerous flickered in Richard's eyes. "I've protected this family and its legacy for decades while you were building your little life across the country. Everything I've done has been to secure Monroe Publishing's future. By stealing from it? By isolating grandmother and lying to everyone?" Richard's facade of reasonableness cracked. "You have no idea what it takes to keep a company like this afloat. The sacrifices, the hard choices." His voice hardened. "You think you can waltz back after 7 years and claim what you haven't earned? What you don't even understand?" "I understand enough to know fraud when I see it." He stepped closer, looming over her. "Be very careful, Eliza. You're playing a game with rules you don't comprehend. Those documents won't help you. Who do you think the board will believe? The dedicated executive who's guided the company through difficult times, or the estranged granddaughter suddenly interested in her inheritance?" The threat hung between them, but Eliza stood her ground. "I think they'll believe the financial records and Beatrice herself." Richard laughed, a cold sound devoid of humor. "Mother's health makes her testimony unreliable. As for records, papers can be lost, contexts misinterpreted." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Family dinner is in 2 hours. I suggest you use that time to reconsider your position. There's still a place for you in this family, Eliza, but not as Mother's puppet in some revenge fantasy." He turned to leave, then paused. "That caretaker, Marcus, he's been filling Mother's head with suspicions, encouraging her paranoia. I've already spoken to the agency about replacing him after the reunion, just so you know where to place your loyalties." The implied threat against Marcus made something harden in Eliza's chest. This wasn't just about money or control. It was about Richard's willingness to hurt anyone who threatened his position. After he left, Eliza carefully repacked the documents and journal, securing them in her bag. As she headed back toward the main house, she saw Victoria waiting at the garden's edge. "Richard found you," Victoria stated, her expression grim. "He did. He's becoming careless, desperate." Victoria handed Eliza a USB drive. "Financial records from the past 3 years, including transfers to his personal accounts disguised as vendor payments. I've been documenting everything since I found the first discrepancies." "Why didn't you take this to grandmother sooner?" Victoria's face showed years of suppressed frustration. "I tried, 2 years ago. Richard intercepted me, convinced Mother I was having emotional difficulties due to my divorce. By the time I realized how thoroughly he'd undermined my credibility, he'd restricted access to her. It wasn't until Marcus was hired that I found an ally who could get information to her directly." They walked in silence for a moment before Victoria added, "Tonight's dinner is important to Mother. It's her 78th birthday, though the celebration was delayed due to her health. Richard will be on his best behavior, playing the devoted son. Just be prepared." As they neared the house, Marcus emerged from a side entrance, his normally composed expression troubled. He joined them on a secluded portion of the terrace. "Mrs. Beatrice would like to speak with you before dinner," he told Eliza, his voice low. "And I should warn you, Richard has been making inquiries about replacing me. He approached the agency directly this morning. He's eliminating anyone loyal to grandmother, Eliza said. Marcus nodded. There's something else you should... No. Mrs. Beatrice's health is declining more rapidly than she's letting on. The symptoms she's experiencing, the occasional confusion, the fatigue, they're not simply age. She has a progressive condition affecting her cognitive function. How long? Victoria asked, her voice barely audible. Months, not years, Marcus replied. She's lucid now, especially in the mornings, but the decline will accelerate. She knows this, which is why the timing of this reunion was so specific. She needed to be strong enough to see it through. The revelation landed, heavily. Beatrice wasn't just testing them. She was making final arrangements before she no longer could. The birthday dinner preparations are already underway, Marcus continued. Mrs. Beatrice has requested a private moment with you in her sitting. Room at 6 before the family gathers. Inside the house, the atmosphere had shifted from tense anticipation to polished performance. Staff moved efficiently through the rooms, arranging flowers, polishing silver, transforming the formal dining room into a celebration space. Family members had retreated to prepare, the earlier confrontations temporarily suspended in favor of maintaining appearances. Sarah intercepted Eliza at the base of the main staircase, her expression a mixture of determination and fear. We need to talk, she said, glancing over her shoulder. About the letters, about why I... Not now, Sarah. Richard's voice cut through the moment as he descended the stairs. Eliza needs to prepare for dinner, and you promised to help with Mother's arrangements. Something shifted in Sarah's expression, a flicker of resistance. This is important, Richard. So is Mother's comfort on her birthday. His tone softened to something almost reasonable. There will be time for explanations later, I promise. Right now, we all have roles to play. The word choice was telling. Roles, not responsibilities. As if the entire evening were a performance with Richard as director. Sarah hesitated, then squeezed Eliza's hand. Later, she whispered, before allowing Richard to guide her away. In her room, Eliza carefully secured the journal and documents, in her luggage, then prepared for the evening ahead. As she dressed for dinner, she found herself studying her reflection, searching for traces of Beatrice in her own features. The determined set of the jaw, the observant eyes that both Diane and Richard had commented on. For the first time since arriving at Maple Grove, Eliza felt not just reactive, but purposeful. The victim of family manipulation was becoming an active participant in Beatrice's plan for justice. Or was it revenge? The line between the two seemed increasingly blurred. At precisely 6 o'clock, Eliza knocked on the door to Beatrice's private sitting room, the weight of everything she had discovered, pressing against her chest. The voice that called for her to enter sounded stronger than it had in days. Beatrice sat by the window, dressed elegantly for her birthday dinner, a leather portfolio open on the table beside her. Her expression, as she looked up at Eliza, held both resolve and something like relief. You found the summer house, she stated. Yes. Then you understand what's at stake. Beatrice gestured to the chair opposite her. It's time I explained everything, Eliza. Tonight we'll set forces in motion that cannot be easily stopped, and you deserve to know precisely what you're inheriting, and why. Beatrice gestured for Eliza to close the door, creating a private sanctuary against the bustle of birthday preparations outside. The sitting room felt different tonight, less a space for contemplation and more a war room for the final moves, in a long-planned strategy. You've read my journal? Beatrice began, her voice steady despite the frailty of her frame. You've seen the financial records. What conclusions have you drawn? That Richard has been systematically undermining you and stealing from the company, Eliza replied, and that you've known for longer than anyone realizes. A small smile touched Beatrice's lips. Yes, but that's only part of the story. She gestured to the leather portfolio beside her. This contains the full terms of my revised will and succession plan for Monroe Publishing. I've had my attorney prepare everything, though the final decisions remain to be made. By you? By you, Beatrice corrected. The inheritance is real, Eliza. I am indeed leaving you the controlling interest in Monroe Publishing and the majority of my personal estate. But it comes with conditions that have nothing to do with money and everything to do with responsibility. She opened the portfolio, revealing legal documents with blank spaces awaiting signatures. You have 3 choices. Accept everything, the company, the estate, and the burden of rebuilding what Richard has damaged. Decline everything and return to your life in Seattle, free of Monroe family complications. Or create your own option that I haven't anticipated. The weight of these possibilities settled over Eliza. Why me? Why not Victoria? Or even James? They've been here learning the business. Victoria lacks the courage to lead, though she has the integrity to support a proper leader. James has talent but has spent too many years under Richard's influence, learning the wrong lessons about what matters. Beatrice's gaze was penetrating. You have something they lack, the ability to create rather than merely manage. Monroe, publishing was built on creative vision combined with business acumen. You've already demonstrated the first. I believe you have the capacity for the second. This isn't fair to any of us, Eliza said. Setting up this test, manipulating everyone, it's just another form of control. Perhaps, Beatrice acknowledged, but when conventional approaches fail, unconventional ones become necessary. Richard has spent years constructing a reality where he alone can save the company he's been destroying. Sometimes an elaborate strategy is required to reveal simple truths. And what truth are you hoping to reveal with all this? That inheritance isn't about money or power. It's about stewardship. About who will protect what matters. Beatrice reached for Eliza's hand. Tonight at dinner, I'll be announcing that my final decisions regarding inheritance will be made tomorrow. There will be conditions that none of them expect. Richard will react badly. He always does when control slips away. Are you prepared? For that? The question hung between them, laden with implications beyond the immediate confrontation. Was Eliza prepared not just for tonight's drama, but for the responsibility Beatrice was offering or imposing? I don't know, Eliza admitted honestly, but I'm tired of running from this family's complications. Whatever happens tonight, I'll face it directly. Something like pride flickered in Beatrice's eyes. That's all I've ever asked. She closed the portfolio. One last thing. Whatever you decide about the inheritance, there's something you should know. I never abandoned you, Eliza. When you left 7 years ago, I respected what I thought was your choice. By the time I realized the deception, you'd built a new life. I didn't want to disrupt it without certainty that my interference would help, rather than harm. The simple acknowledgement released something tight in Eliza's chest, a pain she'd carried so long it had become part of her. Thank you for telling me that. Now, Beatrice said, her tone shifting to something more practical, help your old grandmother to her birthday dinner. We have quite a performance ahead of us. The formal dining room gleamed under crystal chandeliers, the table a masterpiece of floral arrangements, fine china, and polished silver. Family members in evening attire created a tableau of practiced elegance that belied the tensions simmering beneath. Richard, at his most charming, moved among them like a conductor, ensuring every interaction reinforced his position as devoted son and natural leader. Eliza entered with Beatrice on her arm, the quiet conversation immediately shifting as all eyes turned to them. If anyone noticed the subtle show of support in their linked arms, they had the grace not to comment directly. Richard quickly approached, solicitous and performative. "Mother, you look radiant," he declared, escorting her to the head of the table. "We've arranged everything exactly as you prefer." The meal progressed through its elegant courses, with the practiced rhythm of a family accustomed to formal occasions. Conversation remained carefully superficial, childhood memories carefully curated to paint a harmonious picture, business anecdotes selected to highlight Richard's contributions, gentle teasing that never crossed into truly personal territory. Only Diane occasionally disrupted the performance with observations too pointed to deflect, her raised eyebrow at particularly revisionist family stories speaking volumes. James, unusually subdued, watched the interactions with growing detachment, his gaze frequently returning to the documents Victoria had discreetly shown him before dinner. As dessert was served, Beatrice's favorite lemon tart, Richard rose for what everyone recognized as the traditional birthday toast. His eloquence was undeniable as he spoke of Beatrice's legacy, her vision in building Monroe Publishing, her dedication to family. Only those who knew the truth could detect the subtle ways he positioned himself as the natural inheritor of these virtues. And so, he concluded, raising his glass, to Mother, whose wisdom continues to guide us all. The family echoed the sentiment, but before they could drink, Beatrice raised her hand. "Thank you, Richard, for those kind words." Her voice, though soft, commanded immediate attention. "As I look around this table, I'm reminded of how quickly time passes and how important it is to ensure one's affairs are in proper order." A subtle tension rippled through the gathering. This was not the expected response to a birthday toast. "Tomorrow morning, my attorney will be joining us to finalize my decisions regarding the future of Monroe Publishing and the distribution of my estate." Her gaze moved deliberately around the table. "The arrangements may surprise some of you, as they come with conditions I haven't previously discussed." Richard's smile remained fixed, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. "Mother, is this really the moment to discuss business matters? We're celebrating you tonight." "What better time to discuss legacy than when we're all gathered?" Beatrice replied. "I merely wanted everyone to be prepared. The conditions attached to the inheritance will require choices from all of you about what truly matters and what you're willing to sacrifice for it." The measured words landed like stones in still water, ripples of reaction moving through the assembled family. Victoria watched Richard with barely concealed satisfaction. Sarah paled, her fingers twisting her napkin beneath the table. James straightened, suddenly alert. "How mysterious, Beatrice," Diane commented with undisguised amusement, though not entirely unexpected. "You've never been one to make things simple when complexity would be more illuminating." Richard laughed, a sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Mother enjoys her little dramatic moments. I'm sure whatever conditions she's considering, we'll all find them reasonable." He turned to Eliza, his expression hardening slightly. "Though perhaps some of us should consider whether we've demonstrated the commitment necessary to have a voice in family matters." The implicit challenge hung in the air. "What exactly are you suggesting, Uncle Richard?" Eliza asked, maintaining her composure. "Merely that inheritance implies investment, contribution." His tone remained light, though his meaning was anything but. 7 years of absence, during which you never once inquired about the company's welfare or your grandmother's health, suggests a certain detachment from family responsibilities. "Richard," Sarah began tentatively, "that's not entirely—" "It's all right, Mother," Eliza interrupted. "Uncle Richard is entitled to his perspective." "It's not merely my perspective," Richard pressed, sensing weakness. "It's documented fact. Not once in 7 years did you call grandmother. Not one. Birthday card, not one Christmas visit. When she was hospitalized with pneumonia last winter, your concern was notably absent." Eliza felt the table's attention shift to her, judgment forming in their eyes. The manipulation was skillfully done, positioning her as the callous granddaughter, returning only for financial gain. "That's not accurate, Richard," came an unexpected voice. James set down his wineglass deliberately. "Eliza did right. Regularly. The letters simply never reached grandmother. A shocked silence fell over the table. "What are you talking about?" Richard demanded. "I found copies in your study last year," James continued, his voice steady. "Intercepted correspondence, forged responses. I didn't understand the full significance then. I do now." He turned to Beatrice. "I should have said something sooner. I apologize for my cowardice." Richard's face flushed. "This is absurd. James is clearly—" "It's true," Sarah interrupted, her voice trembling but determined. For years I helped intercept letters, copy Eliza's handwriting, fabricate responses." She looked at her daughter, eyes brimming with tears. "Richard convinced me it was for your own good, that you needed space from Beatrice's influence to find your own path, that maintaining the separation was actually respecting your choices." The confession landed like a thunderclap. Family members exchanged shocked glances, the carefully maintained facade crumbling in real time. "Oh, Sarah," Diane murmured, not unkindly. "You always did confuse compliance with compassion." Richard's composure fractured. "This is ridiculous. Mother, surely you don't believe—" "I not only believe it, Richard. I've known about it for some time," Beatrice replied evenly. "Did you really think I wouldn't recognize when my own granddaughter's voice was being imitated? The forgeries were skilled, but a grandmother knows." "You've been turning this family against me," Richard accused, desperation edging his voice. "Conspiring, manipulating." "No, Richard," Victoria interrupted. "You've been manipulating all of us for years. The company finances, Mother's isolation, Eliza's estrangement, all carefully orchestrated to maintain your control." As the accusations flew, Diane leaned toward Eliza. "Beatrice always said truth has its own timing," she murmured. "Though, I must admit she's orchestrated this revelation with particular skill." Indeed, Beatrice watched the unfolding chaos with the serene detachment of a chess master who had anticipated every move. When the arguments reached their peak, she tapped her water glass gently, the crystal sound cutting through the noise. "This is precisely why conditions are necessary," she said calmly. "This family has subsisted too long on secrets and manipulations. Tomorrow's meeting will determine who is willing to embrace transparency and accountability, and who is not." She rose from her seat, effectively ending dinner. "I look forward to seeing you all at 10 o'clock. The family dispersed in shocked silence, the evening's careful celebration thoroughly derailed. Richard stormed out first, followed by a cluster of confused relatives seeking private spaces to process the revelations. Sarah lingered, clearly wanting to approach Eliza but uncertain of her welcome. Eliza needed space to think. The garden beckoned, a quiet place to process the evening's developments and consider the choice Beatrice had presented. Accept the inheritance with all its complications, or walk away clean. Create some third option that honored her connection. To Beatrice, without binding herself to a family built on deception, the cool night air provided immediate relief as she stepped onto the terrace. Stars scattered across the clear sky, indifferent to human dramas. Eliza followed the gravel path toward the rose garden, seeking its secluded stone bench. She had walked perhaps 50 yards when hurried footsteps approached from behind. Turning, she expected to see her mother, or perhaps Victoria. Instead, Marcus rushed toward her, his normally composed expression replaced by genuine alarm. "Miss Eliza," he called, slightly out of breath. "You need to come quickly. It's your grandmother. She's collapsed and is asking for you. Please hurry." The Last Beneficiary, Part 8. True Inheritance. Eliza followed Marcus through the moonlit gardens at a near run, her mind racing with possibilities. Was this another strategic move in Beatrice's elaborate plan? Or had the evening's confrontations proven too much for her grandmother's fragile health? They entered through a side door, bypassing the library where hushed voices suggested some family members had gathered to dissect the dinner's revelations. Marcus led her up the back staircase to Beatrice's suite, where the door stood partially open. Inside, Dr. Chambers, the family physician who had attended the Monroes for decades, was checking Beatrice's vitals while Sarah hovered anxiously nearby. Beatrice lay propped against pillows, her face pale but her eyes alert. Something in her expression shifted when she saw Eliza. Relief, perhaps, or resolve. "There you are," she said, her voice weaker than it had been at dinner. "No need for such worried faces. I'm not dying tonight, merely making a point." Dr. Chambers looked up from his examination. "Your grandmother experienced what appears to be a mild syncope episode, a temporary drop in blood pressure causing brief loss of consciousness. Given her condition, I'd like to monitor her overnight, but she's stable now." "Thank you, William," Beatrice said. "Now, if you wouldn't mind asking the family to come in. One crisis per evening is quite enough." As the doctor stepped out, Sarah moved to Eliza's side, her expression hesitant. "She asked for you first," she whispered, "before anyone else." The simple statement hung between them, an acknowledgement of shifting family dynamics that left Sarah both relieved and adrift. Within minutes, the bedroom filled with Monroe family members in various states of concern and confusion. Richard arrived last, his face composed into an expression of appropriate worry that didn't quite mask the calculation beneath. "Well," Beatrice said, surveying them from her pillows, "this is certainly one way to ensure everyone's attention." Victoria moved closer to the bed. "Mother, perhaps this discussion should wait until you've rested." "There may not be another opportunity quite like this one," Beatrice replied. "When mortality makes its presence known, people tend to listen more carefully." She adjusted herself against the pillows, gathering strength. "You all came when called. That's something at least. But I wonder, would you have come so readily if money weren't involved? If there were no inheritance, no company shares, no real estate, just an old woman wanting to make peace with her family before time runs out?" The question hung in the silence, uncomfortable in its directness. "The true test was never about who deserves wealth," Beatrice continued. "It was about who would choose healing over advantage. Who would see that the real inheritance worth preserving isn't money or property but the bonds between us, damaged as they may be." She looked at each face surrounding her bed. "I would like to speak with each of you privately before tomorrow's meeting. To say what needs to be said while clarity remains, Marcus will arrange the schedule. Eliza, you'll be first. The rest of you, please wait downstairs." As the family filed out, Diane squeezed Beatrice's hand. "Dramatic as ever, old friend," she murmured, affection evident beneath the teasing. "I'll keep watch while you have your conversations." When only Eliza remained, Beatrice's carefully maintained strength seemed to recede slightly. "Sit," she gestured to the chair beside her bed. "We don't have much time." "Is this real or another strategy?" Eliza asked directly. "Both," Beatrice admitted. "The episode was genuine, a warning sign of what's coming. But I've learned to use even my weaknesses strategically." She reached for Eliza's hand. Tonight revealed much about this family. James finding his backbone, Sarah beginning to break free from Richard's influence. But the most important revelation was watching you. "What do you mean?" "You didn't triumph over Richard or claim victory when his deceptions were exposed. You watched, you listened. You considered consequences beyond your own satisfaction." Beatrice squeezed her hand. "That's the quality I've been looking for. The ability to see the whole board, not just your own pieces. Grandmother, I still haven't decided about the inheritance." "I know, and that careful consideration is precisely why you're the right choice." Beatrice's expression softened. "But know this, Whatever you decide, the relationship between us is separate from any financial legacy. That connection is already restored, regardless of tomorrow's decisions. The simple statement released something Eliza hadn't realized she was holding on to. The fear that Beatrice's interest in her was conditional on accepting the inheritance and all it entailed. "Thank you," she whispered. "Now, send in Victoria." "Next," Beatrice instructed, "and keep an eye on Richard. When cornered, he becomes unpredictable." The next 2 hours saw a procession of family members through Beatrice's bedroom, each emerging with expressions ranging from thoughtful to shaken. Victoria exited, looking resolute, her years of careful documentation finally acknowledged. James appeared humbled, yet somehow lighter. Sarah came out in tears, not of distress, but release, reaching for Eliza's hand as she passed. Richard's session was notably brief. He emerged with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes, immediately heading downstairs without speaking to anyone. Near midnight, as the family dispersed to their rooms to process the evening's events, Eliza found herself unable to sleep. She made her way to the library, intending to sort through her thoughts in solitude. As she approached, hushed voices from within caught her attention. "Just sign these amended documents tonight and the situation resolves itself," came Richard's urgent whisper. "The board meeting is in 3 days. We need to secure the voting shares before then." "Mother specifically said she's meeting with her attorney tomorrow," a female voice responded. "Cousin Patricia, who served on the board." "That meeting may not happen given her condition," Richard countered. "These papers simply formalize what's always been the plan. Mother agreed to all of this months ago, before her health declined." Eliza was about to intervene when another voice spoke from within. "Did she really, Richard?" Diane's distinctive tone cut through the deception. "Because that's not what the audio recordings of her actual board conversations indicate." A tense silence followed, broken by Victoria's voice. "Step away from Patricia, Richard. Those documents aren't what you're claiming they are." Eliza entered the library to find Richard standing rigidly between Victoria and Diane, Patricia looking confused with papers in her hand. On seeing Eliza, Richard's expression hardened further. "Family meeting?" Eliza asked mildly. Richard was just explaining how these documents authorize him to act on Mother's behalf at the upcoming board meeting, Victoria said, taking the papers from Patricia's hand. "Interesting, since Mother explicitly revoked his financial authority last month." Diane crossed to the liquor cabinet, pouring herself a neat whiskey. "Your timing needs work, Richard. You might have succeeded if you'd waited for everyone to go to bed." "This is a misunderstanding," Richard insisted, though his usual confidence had cracked. "I'm simply trying to protect the company from hasty decisions made during Mother's health crisis." "By forging her signature on transfer documents?" Victoria held up a page. "This isn't protection, it's theft." Richard's gaze shifted calculatingly between the 4 women. "You have no idea what it takes to keep this company profitable. The decisions I've made, while perhaps technically outside standard procedure, have always served the greater good of Monroe Publishing. The company has lost money for 3 consecutive quarters under your leadership," Victoria countered. "The greater good you've served has been your own financial interests." The confrontation was interrupted by Marcus appearing in the doorway. "Excuse me," he said quietly. "Mrs. Beatrice is asking for Eliza and Victoria, immediately." They found Beatrice sitting fully upright in bed, her expression alert despite the late hour. "Richard has made his move, hasn't he?" she asked without preamble. "He tried to get Patricia to help push through alternate documents," Victoria confirmed. Beatrice nodded as if this were expected. "The question now becomes what to do about it." She looked at Eliza. "The evidence Victoria has gathered is sufficient for criminal charges: financial fraud, embezzlement, elder abuse through financial exploitation." Richard could face significant prison time. The weight of the decision settled on Eliza's shoulders. "What do you want to do?" "This is your test, not mine," Beatrice replied. Justice and mercy rarely walk easily together, yet neither is complete without the other. What Richard has done deserves consequences, but remember, he is still family. Victoria placed a hand on Eliza's arm. "Whatever you decide, I'll support. But know that without significant intervention, Richard will continue his patterns of manipulation and financial exploitation." Eliza considered the options, weighing justice against the impact on the family. Criminal charges would protect the company, but fracture the family irreparably. Doing nothing would enable continued harm. There had to be a middle path, accountability without destruction. "I think Richard needs to face consequences," she said finally. "But perhaps those consequences can include a path to redemption, rather than just punishment." Beatrice's expression softened with something like pride. "What do you propose?" "Financial restitution, resignation from operational control of the company, therapy to address whatever drives his need for control and validation." Eliza looked at Victoria. "And full transparency with the board about what's happened so they can implement proper oversight moving forward." Victoria nodded slowly. "It could work, with the right leverage." "The leverage is simple," Eliza said. "Richard cares about two things: his reputation and his financial security. We offer him a choice between a public legal battle that would destroy both, or a private family resolution that preserves his dignity while requiring genuine accountability." Beatrice smiled fully for the first time that evening. "A solution that offers both justice and the possibility of healing. You see the entire picture, not just isolated pieces." She reached for Victoria's hand. "Have Marcus arrange for the family to gather in my study at 10 tomorrow as originally planned. My attorney will still be joining us, but perhaps with slightly different documents than I'd first envisioned." As they prepared to leave, Beatrice called Eliza back. "One moment." When they were alone, Beatrice's careful composure slipped slightly, revealing the genuine fatigue beneath. "In case tonight's episode becomes something more serious before morning, I want you to know, I've always been proud of you, Eliza. Not because of what you might become or what you might do for the family legacy, but simply for who you are." The unexpected vulnerability brought tears to Eliza's eyes. For a moment, they weren't heiress and benefactor, but simply grandmother and granddaughter, reconnecting across years of enforced separation. "Rest now," Eliza said gently. "Tomorrow will take care of itself." As she closed the door, she found Sarah waiting in the hallway, her expression tentative yet determined. "Is there still a chance?" Sarah asked softly. "For us to find our way back to being mother and daughter again?" Eliza studied the woman who had participated in her estrangement, yet now stood before her seeking reconciliation. The path forward wouldn't be simple, but perhaps that was the true inheritance Beatrice had been preparing her for. The complex, messy work of rebuilding family from the broken pieces of the past. "I think," Eliza replied carefully, "that would be a beginning worth exploring." Morning light streamed through the tall windows of Beatrice's study, lending a solemn dignity to the gathering. The family assembled with uncharacteristic punctuality, the previous night's events having stripped away pretenses. Beatrice sat at her desk, looking remarkably composed after her health scare. Beside her stood a silver-haired man with kind eyes and the measured demeanor of someone accustomed to navigating family complexities. "This is Hamilton Wexler," Beatrice introduced. "My attorney for 30 years and one of the few people I trust, implicitly with both legal and personal matters." The family settled into chairs arranged in a semicircle. Richard positioned himself slightly apart, his expression carefully neutral though tension radiated from his rigid posture. Victoria sat near Eliza, while James chose a place between them and Richard, symbolic of his evolving position. Sarah, looking as though she hadn't slept, kept glancing between Eliza and Richard. Diane lounged in a corner armchair like an amused observer at a particularly interesting play. "Before Mr. Wexler begins," Beatrice said, "I want to address last night's events directly. Richard attempted to circumvent my wishes by presenting fraudulent documents to Patricia." She held up a hand as Richard began to protest. "This is not open for debate. Victoria and Diane witnessed it, and the documents themselves are evidence." She looked at her son with a mixture of disappointment and resolve. This behavior represents the culmination of a pattern stretching back years. Financial manipulation, isolation tactics, and deliberate deception regarding Eliza's correspondence. All documented meticulously by Victoria, verified by independent auditors, and now acknowledged by this family. Richard's face remained impassive, though a muscle twitched near his jaw. "Despite these actions, you remain my son. While there must be consequences, there can also be opportunity for redemption. The terms of my estate have been modified to reflect this reality." She nodded to Hamilton. "Please proceed." The attorney opened a leather portfolio containing several documents. "Mrs. Monroe has structured her estate and the future of Monroe Publishing with careful consideration for both justice and reconciliation. I'll outline the key provisions, after which each of you will receive individual documentation of your specific inheritance and responsibilities." He adjusted his glasses. First, regarding Monroe Publishing. Controlling interest will pass to Eliza Monroe, with the condition that major strategic decisions require consultation with James Monroe, who will serve as Chief Financial Officer with expanded authority. James straightened, surprise evident in his expression. Victoria Monroe will assume the role of chairperson of the board, with Diane Layton serving as special advisor for the first 2 years of transition. Hamilton turned a page. Richard Monroe will relinquish all operational control and board positions within Monroe Publishing. He must repay $3 million in misappropriated funds according to a structured payment plan. Upon completion of restitution and a mandatory ethics program, he may apply for a non-controlling advisory position at the discretion of the board. Richard remained motionless, though his complexion paled slightly. Regarding personal assets, Maple Grove Estate will be held in trust, with Eliza Monroe serving as primary trustee. Family members retain visitation rights according to a schedule managed by Marcus Chen, who will continue as estate manager with expanded responsibilities and compensation. Marcus, standing quietly by the door, blinked in surprise. Sarah Monroe will receive ownership of the Vermont lake house she has always loved but never claimed for herself, along with a trust dedicated to establishing an art therapy foundation, acknowledging her abandoned artistic talents and creating opportunity for their renewal. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Hamilton continued through the detailed provisions, each family member receiving something that reflected not their expectations, but Beatrice's understanding of their true character and potential. Cousins with genuine business acumen received meaningful roles. Those who had contributed little were granted modest financial support contingent on personal development efforts. Nothing was simply given. Everything came with both responsibility and opportunity. When Hamilton finished, the room remained silent, each person processing revelations that seemed to peer into their souls. These terms are contingent upon unanimous family agreement, Hamilton concluded. Any contest will trigger alternative provisions focused solely on legal justice rather than family reconciliation. You have 24 hours to consider your decision. Richard was the first to speak, his voice controlled but strained. And if I refuse these terms? If I challenge this characterization of my leadership? Then you face criminal charges for financial fraud, embezzlement, and elder abuse, Hamilton replied matter-of-factly. Victoria's documentation has been reviewed by the district attorney, who is prepared to file charges if Mrs. Monroe gives the word. The alternative provisions would support full prosecution while ensuring company stability through the legal proceedings. So it's blackmail, Richard said flatly. It's choice, Beatrice corrected. Between public disgrace, with legal consequences, or private accountability with opportunity for redemption. Between destroying this family through pride or helping rebuild it through humility. Richard's gaze swept the room, searching for allies, but finding none. Even Sarah, who had supported him for years, looked away. I need time to consider, he said finally. As do we all, Beatrice acknowledged. Hamilton will be available to answer your questions privately. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning for your decisions. As family members began to disperse, processing their individual provisions, James approached Eliza. CFO with expanded authority, he said, a tentative smile forming. Working with you rather than against you. Grandmothers always did have an unexpected sense of humor. Or insight, Eliza suggested. Your financial skills balanced with my creative direction? It might actually work. We'll need to establish clear boundaries, he said, and rebuild. Trust, she agreed. Worth trying, though. He extended his hand. Partners? The gesture was simple, but significant, acknowledging both the painful past and possible future. Eliza took his hand. Partners. Across the room, Sarah approached, hesitantly. The Art Therapy Foundation, she remembered. She sees more than we realized, Eliza said softly. I don't deserve her forgiveness. Or yours. Sarah's voice trembled. Maybe inheritance isn't about deserving, Eliza suggested. Maybe it's about becoming. As the room emptied, Victoria paused beside Eliza. He'll fight it, she said quietly, nodding toward Richard's retreating back. Then accept it when he realizes there's no alternative. Then try to find loopholes. I expect nothing less, Eliza replied. But the structure Hamilton created has safeguards, and we'll be watching. Soon, only Beatrice and Eliza remained in the study. The commanding presence Beatrice had maintained throughout the reading seemed to soften as the door closed behind the last family member. Well, she said with a small smile. That went about as expected. You planned for every reaction, Eliza observed, taking the chair beside her grandmother's desk. I've had years to study this family, to understand both their weaknesses and their untapped strengths. Beatrice reached for Eliza's hand. The real test begins now, not just for Richard, but for all of you. Creating something lasting from what's broken is far harder than simply assigning blame or punishment. Why did you change the provisions to include James as my partner? That wasn't in your original plan. Because I watched him choose integrity over advantage last night. That deserves recognition. Beatrice's gaze was thoughtful. And because you'll need allies with complementary skills. Leading alone is a burden too heavy for anyone. What if I fail? What if the company continues to struggle under my leadership? Then you'll have faced a worthy challenge with courage. Success isn't guaranteed, Eliza, only the opportunity to try with purpose. Beatrice squeezed her hand. Besides, you have resources Richard never fully utilized. Victoria's institutional knowledge, James's financial acumen, and your own creative vision. The same qualities that make your illustrations. Connect with children can help you see opportunities others miss. As sunlight shifted across the polished desk, casting the room in warm amber, grandmother and granddaughter sat together in comfortable silence. The past, with its manipulations and estrangements, gradually giving way to a future not yet written, but facing clear-eyed truth rather than comfortable deception. So, Beatrice said finally, will you accept, not just the legal inheritance, but the harder legacy of rebuilding what's been broken? In that moment, The question expanded beyond business decisions or family politics to something more fundamental. A choice between continuing to define herself in opposition to her family's complications or engaging with them directly, on her own terms. Yes, Eliza said, but in my own way, not simply following predetermined paths. The company needs to evolve, just as this family does. Beatrice's smile held both satisfaction and something like release. I would expect nothing less. Now, shall we see what the rest of them decide? Summer gave way to autumn's first blush, as the Monroe family reconvened at Maple Grove. 1 month had passed since the dramatic reading of Beatrice's inheritance plan, a month of legal consultations, personal reckonings, and tentative steps toward implementation. The October afternoon painted the estate in rich amber and crimson tones, the fiery maples that gave the property its name standing like sentinels around the grand house. Eliza stepped onto the terrace, watching as family members arrived in staggered groups. Each greeting held the careful politeness of people relearning how to interact without the scaffolding of long-established pretenses. She had spent most of the past month in the Monroe publishing offices in Boston, absorbing operational knowledge while maintaining her illustration deadlines via late-night work sessions. The exhaustion was constant but purposeful, bringing clarity to her vision for the company's future. James appeared beside her, offering a cup of coffee. Their working relationship had evolved with surprising ease, his financial expertise complementing her creative instincts. After initial wariness, they'd discovered a collaborative rhythm that reminded her of their childhood friendship before ambition and manipulation had driven them apart. Richard's here, James noted, nodding toward the black sedan pulling into the circular drive. 30 minutes early, a personal record. He's trying, Eliza acknowledged. In his way. Richard's initial fury at the inheritance terms had eventually given way to pragmatic acceptance. The alternative, criminal charges and public disgrace, left little choice. While his demeanor remained stiffly formal, he had begun the restitution process and attended the required ethics program without complaint. Today would mark his first limited participation in family business discussions since the reunion. Victoria emerged from the library, tablet in hand. The conference room is set up for your presentation. Diane's flight was delayed, but she'll join us by video for the strategic portion. How's grandmother this morning? Eliza asked. Clear-minded? And determined. Marcus says she had a good night. Victoria's expression softened slightly. She's quite excited about your proposal for the children's division. The past month had brought changes to Beatrice's health management as well. After frank discussions with Dr. Chambers, she had agreed to a more comprehensive treatment plan for her condition. Though progression was inevitable, proper care could extend her periods of clarity and mitigate symptoms. As family members settled in the conference room, now equipped with modern technology that Beatrice had resisted for years, Eliza observed the shifting dynamics. Cousins who had been passive observers during the reunion now engaged actively, aware that their roles under the new structure would reflect their contributions rather than mere family position. Sarah sat near, but not beside Richard, her posture suggesting newfound independence. Beatrice entered last, leaning on Marcus's arm but moving with purpose. The room quieted immediately. Well, she said, taking her seat at the head of the table. 1 month in, and Monroe Publishing hasn't collapsed. I consider that a promising start. The gentle humor broke the tension, eliciting smiles around the table. Eliza and James have prepared a presentation on their vision for the company's future, Victoria announced, after which we'll discuss specific implementation strategies. Eliza stood, suddenly aware of the weight of the moment. These people had known her first as the favored granddaughter, then as the estranged rebel, and now as their reluctant leader. Establishing herself as something different, something authentic, would require more than legal authority. Monroe Publishing has always been built on two foundations, she began: literary excellence and family legacy. For too long, we've allowed those foundations to erode, sacrificing quality for quick profits and treating legacy as entitlement rather than responsibility. James activated the presentation screen, displaying financial projections alongside creative direction concepts. Our proposal focuses on three key initiatives, Eliza continued. First, stabilizing our financial position through responsible cost management rather than arbitrary cuts. Second, revitalizing our core imprints by returning to the editorial vision that built our reputation. And third, expanding strategically into areas that leverage our strengths while embracing innovation. What followed was a detailed presentation of their plan, James handling financial restructuring, Eliza outlining creative direction, both demonstrating a united approach that acknowledged hard realities while building toward sustainable growth. As they spoke, Eliza noticed Richard watching with an expression she couldn't quite read, not quite approval, not quite resentment, but something more complex. When they opened for questions, the discussion was surprisingly substantive. Family members engaged with genuine interest rather than performative participation. Even Richard's comments, though carefully measured, provided insights based on his decades of experience. The children's book imprint expansion is particularly promising, Victoria noted as the presentation concluded. The market analysis shows significant growth potential, and it plays to our historic strengths. I'd like to hear more about that aspect, Beatrice said, her gaze resting on Eliza. It's actually something I hope to discuss with you privately, Eliza responded. Perhaps in the garden after our meeting. Beatrice nodded, understanding the significance of the request. As the formal meeting transitioned to smaller working groups, Sarah approached Eliza near the refreshment table. The past month had seen weekly phone calls between them, awkward at first, gradually becoming more natural as they established new patterns of communication. The Art Therapy Foundation paperwork is finalized, Sarah said. The first programs will launch in January at 3 community centers. That's wonderful, Eliza replied. Have you decided if you'll teach some of the classes yourself? Sarah's eyes brightened. I'm considering it. I've been painting again. Just small watercolors, nothing significant. But it feels... She paused, searching for the right word. Healing. I'd like to see them sometime, Eliza offered. I'd like that too. Sarah hesitated, then added, I brought something for you. It's in my car, your childhood sketchbooks. I kept them all these years, even when... She trailed off, the painful history hanging between them. Even when Richard wanted you to dispose of everything connecting us, Eliza finished gently. Sarah nodded, her expression both ashamed and resolute. I couldn't. They were too precious. She squared her shoulders slightly. I'm seeing a therapist now, to understand why I allowed myself to be so controlled for so long. The admission represented significant progress, Sarah taking responsibility for her choices while seeking to change patterns established over decades. Thank you for telling me, Eliza said, and for saving the sketchbooks. Across the room, Richard stood somewhat apart, observing the family interactions with the careful assessment of someone relearning their place in an ecosystem. When his gaze met Eliza's, he gave a small nod of acknowledgement before turning to speak with Hamilton about his restitution schedule. The humbling process had not come easily to him. Pride and habit made genuine contrition difficult, yet the structured consequences left no room for his former manipulations. Whether his compliance would eventually transform into authentic change remained to be seen, but the safeguards Victoria and Hamilton had implemented ensured that any return to company involvement would happen only with demonstrated trustworthiness. Later, as afternoon sun filtered through the garden's remaining foliage, Eliza and Beatrice sat on the stone bench overlooking the pond. Despite the October chill, Beatrice had insisted on coming outside, wrapped in a cashmere shawl and invigorated by the fresh air. Tell me about this children's book imprint, Beatrice prompted. Eliza removed a portfolio from her bag. I'm calling it Beatrice Books, officially acknowledging what the division has been informally called for years. She opened the portfolio to reveal concept sketches and a publishing plan. It will focus on illustrated books that respect children's intelligence while nurturing their imagination. Stories that entertain while building empathy and understanding. And this first project? Beatrice asked, examining the preliminary character sketches of a wolf family. Something we might work on together, Eliza suggested. Your words, my illustrations. A story about a family of wolves learning that hunting together serves them better than competing against each other. Beatrice's fingers traced the sketch of the grandmother wolf, regal, wise, with knowing eyes. Not particularly subtle symbolism, she observed with a smile. I thought we were past the time for subtlety, Eliza replied. Beatrice laughed, the sound carrying across the garden. Indeed we are. Her expression grew thoughtful. You know, when I planned the reunion and all that followed, I believed I was orchestrating a test to determine the future of this family. I'm beginning to think I was the one being tested, learning to trust others with what I built, to release control even when I'm certain I know best. You're still certain you know best? Eliza teased gently. Yes, but now I'm certain you know best in different areas. Beatrice patted her hand. That's progress, of a sort. They sat in comfortable silence, watching golden leaves drift onto the pond's surface. The estate felt different now, less a monument to past achievements and more a living foundation for future possibilities. Will you stay here at Maple Grove? Beatrice asked eventually. For now, splitting time between here and Boston, Eliza replied. I've converted the old study into a studio where I can work on illustrations while learning the publishing business. But I'll keep my apartment in Seattle, too. Some independence is necessary. Balance, Beatrice nodded approvingly. The hardest achievement of all. A week later, Eliza sat at her drawing table in what had once been Beatrice's study. The room had been transformed. Easel near the window capturing northern light. Reference books arranged by color rather than subject, the scent of pencil shavings and watercolor paper replacing leather and lemon polish. She worked steadily on the illustrations for the Wolfpack's lesson, the story she and Beatrice had outlined together. On the page before her, a young wolf stood at a crossroads, choosing between joining the pack's hunt or pursuing a solitary path. The character's expression captured the essential tension of the choice: independence versus connection, individual achievement versus shared purpose. Outside her window, family members came and went about various business. Victoria and James headed toward the carriage house that had been converted to a satellite office. Sarah worked in the garden, rediscovering her love of landscape design. Even Richard made an appearance, arriving for his scheduled meeting with Hamilton about the next phase of financial restitution. The contentious family reunion had evolved into something unexpected. Not perfect harmony, but purposeful connection. The inheritance Eliza had never sought had become not just a burden of responsibility but an opportunity for restoration. She returned to her drawing, adding final details to the wolf's thoughtful eyes that reflected both Beatrice's determination and her own emerging vision. The young wolf would choose the pack in the end, but on her own terms, bringing new, hunting techniques that would strengthen them all. Just as Eliza had chosen family, but in a way that honored rather than erased her independent spirit. Some inheritances she was learning weren't meant to be simply accepted or rejected, but transformed, shaped by both tradition and innovation into something altogether new. Something with roots deep enough to weather storms, yet branches free to reach toward unexplored skies. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the Notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.